unlikely 1918 Bethlehem Steel League. It was highly unlikely for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Steel League consisted of teams at 6 northeastern factories that the Steel operated, from Wilmington, Delaware, up to Quincy, Massachusetts. It was only about 4 months that this league lasted. They only played 19 regular season games and 2 playoff games. Last Friday was the 100th anniversary of the championship game, which was held at Steel Field, Moravian College's Steel Field. And as I'll tell you, there were 2 future Hall of Famers who played on September 14, 1918 in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, USA. Pretty juicy stuff. But what really makes it highly unlikely is that this was a league that functioned in 3 ways. It was a showcase for players who wanted to make the major leagues. It was an outlet for retired major leaguers who still wanted to play. But most importantly, it was a refuge for major leaguers who wanted to dodge the World War I draft. And that's the most fascinating part of it. But as I'll tell you further along the way, it was a motley crew. Could you imagine a league that had a dentist, a judge, a Buick dealer, five future Hall of Famers, including Babe Ruth, one guy who should have been in the Hall of Fame, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and since this is the end of Yom Kippur today, which is fascinating, the Bethlehem factory team had 4 Jewish players, including 3 of the basically 160-odd Jewish people who played in the major leagues. 3 out of 160 over a course of over 100 years is a pretty damn good percentage. So fascinating. I've been working on this for a year and a half. Loved it. It's a slice of Americana pie that not even my friends at the Baseball Hall of Fame know that much about. And I know because I tried to get pictures and biographies of these guys, and they just don't have them. So the league basically started in 1917 without major leaguers. Does anybody know the name Charles Schwab? Famous chairman of the modern Bethlehem Steel. He basically founded the modern Bethlehem Steel in 1904. By 1917, it was the #2 steelmaker in the country, behind U.S. Steel, for which he had worked under the mentorship of Andrew Carnegie. It was just, at this point, it was a huge manufacturer of war materials, munitions. Probably the biggest one for ships and cannon and guns and all sorts of stuff. So in 1917, you have to imagine the workers at the Bethlehem plants around the country are overworked like crazy. So Schwab comes up with this idea of a league for employees to give them entertainment, to help them work out, get their yah-yahs out. And this was very much in keeping with Schwab's philosophy. To be productive, you had to be healthy. And he had already established Bethlehem Steel as having one of the best recreation programs of any corporation in the world. If you were a member, employee, rank and file of Bethlehem Steel, you could do archery, you could wrestle, you could trap shoot, you could play golf, all sorts of stuff. So the baseball league was just part and parcel of that. But some of you folks may know that Bethlehem Steel had a famous, legendary soccer team, professional soccer team. Probably the first true legendary soccer team in American history. He founded that. And he actually ordered the making of what was called Bethlehem Steel Athletic Field in 1913, the first soccer stadium in America with a grandstand. So this great site for soccer. The very first coach of the Bethlehem Steel soccer team was a pretty famous fellow around these guys named Billy Sheridan. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? Billy Sheridan was a wrestling coach at Lehigh for 42 years. His teams won 5 national wrestling championships while at Lehigh. Billy was the director of athletics at Bethlehem Steel and sort of the coordinator of the Bethlehem Steel League. So right away we had some good people working on this league. So 1918 comes and America is really full bore into the war. The War Department finds itself lacking soldiers. They need to get soldiers in a hurry. The last American war, major American war, was really the Spanish-American War. 20 years had passed. So they basically tell males, 18 to 45, you're either going to join the war, you're going to fight, or you have to join an essential military industry. So Charles Schwab, very canny guy, says, great marketing opportunity, great entertainment for my employees. He invites major leaguers from this pool of 18 to 45-year-olds to come and play for the Steel League. So all of a sudden, the Steel League goes from amateur to professional, semi-professional. So it's pretty juicy. The very first name player that signed for the Steel League was a guy named Eddie Plank from Gettysburg. He's a Buick dealer. Eddie Plank had retired the year before in 1917. He had won 323 games as a pitcher for the Philadelphia A's and 2 St. Louis teams. He eventually joined the Hall of Fame. He's one of our 5 Hall of Famers. He was known as a spitballer, so he's a pretty tricky guy. There were actually 2 spitballers, at least 2 spitballers. But the best named player, the really first marquee player to sign up for the Steel League was Shoeless Joe Jackson. Now, how many people don't know who Shoeless Joe is? At this point, in 1918, Shoeless Joe was probably the best all-around baseball player in the major leagues. He had hit over 310 of his 13 seasons. Now, he was an outfielder, left fielder. He had thrown out at least 28 runners in 3 seasons. That's amazing. You know, what an arm. The best, I love the quote about him. He was such a good fielder. The quote about him was, his glove is where triples go to die. That's a famous quote. So, but the thing is, Shoeless Joe in May of 1918 was declared 1A for the draft. He was pretty prime material. He did not want to be drafted. He was playing for the Chicago White Sox. He had a wife, a mom, and a crippled sister to support. So he jumped from the White Sox to the Wilmington, Delaware shipyard team that Bethlehem Steel ran. And boy, because he was such a prominent player, you could have heard the insults hurled at him from his fellow players, his manager, teammates, administrators. He was called a scoundrel, a coward. He was jumping to the Safe Shelter League. Bethlehem Steel was known as the Safe Shelter League. But my favorite quote, really low blow, came from a editorial writer for the Chicago Tribune. He said that Shoeless Joe Jackson sullied the name of the Confederate general, Stonewall Jackson. So he was, you know, all these players who jumped to the league from the majors had to put up with this. Shoeless Joe had to put up with more shit than most of them did. So what people don't realize who scolded Shoeless Joe is that he had a very essential job at the shipyard in Wilmington. He was the chief of the riveting gang. He was partly responsible for, in a year and a half, get this, in a year and a half, the Wilmington, Delaware shipyard built 24 warships. And Shoeless Joe was an essential part of that group. So if they had known that, they might have not been so uncomplimented. So Babe Ruth, I'll get to him later on, he didn't join the league until later, until September. But he was having a breakout year. He was a pitcher at this time for the Boston Red Sox. Some people forget about that. He had won 67 games in 4 seasons, pretty damn good. But because of the Red Sox players jumping to the war, and because of injuries, he became a full-time player for the first time in 1918. Played first base, played the outfield, ended up leading the league, the American League, in home runs with 11. Then in slugging, 555, and pitched very well too. So he was 1A, he could have been drafted very easily, but the powers that be in baseball thought he was too much of a marquee player. They needed him as part of Major League Baseball. Once again, to keep the people, soldiers, anybody connected to the war, they had to keep their morale up. Babe Ruth was a great morale builder. So Matt, where are you, Matt? start showing you some pictures.
Pictures.